Welcome back to the BookEnds YouTube channel. I'm James McGowan.
I'm Jessica Faust.
And today we have with us for her first time ever on the YouTube, Moe Ferrara.
Hi.
Hi, Mo.
So
when you first started at BookEnds, I remember you had gone that first year to a couple different Comic-Cons.
Mm-hmm.
And you're a huge comic book person. And we've had that discussion many times. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But what I was really impressed with and excited about was that at those first Comic-Cons, you took the initiative to go up to creators and introduce them yourself. And from there, you have built something that BookEnds never had. And to be honest, I had never considered. So I love that. Do you want to talk about the comic world and the graphic novels?
Yeah, so I have always been a massive geek, but I have been going to, up until obviously pandemic, New York Comic Con or NYCC since for the last 10 years. Last year was my 10th. So not having this year in October was very, very strange. But through that, I've gotten to know a lot of different creators. Matthew Dow Smith has been a dear friend of mine for about the last 10 years or so. I met him at one of my first. I decided that I was going to start branching more into graphic novels. At the same time, Matt had really wanted to get into having an agent. So I was very lucky to have someone who is a dear friend to kind of help guide me through where are like the good houses, where are the ones to avoid on the comic side, because it was a very new area for me. But at the same time, I know what to look for, how to set up panels and making sure that there's not too much dialogue in them, and how to make sure they breathe, how page turns work, like all of these little things that are very, very picayune just to comics that you don't have to worry about as much in other places. So it was very nice having friends and seeing them pitching to other people to kind of grow my list through that way. And
can I backpedal for a second?
Yeah.
You talked about some things that I don't necessarily understand fully, and I think some of our viewers will be more interested in. When you were talking about the graphic novel, you were talking about panels and page turns, and can you explain that for people who are not graphic novelists or who are interested but very new and don't understand the lingo?
Okay, we'll pull up one of BookEnds' own, Bad Luck Chuck, which was written by Lee McGowan, who is one of my clients, as well as all of the art was by Matt. So one thing in comics that's very different is that you have multiple people, as you can see, working on a project. So Matt actually only did pencils and inks, which are just like the actual drawings themselves, as well as like all of the super black stuff. Those would be like all of the outlines. So somebody else came through and colored. Somebody else came through and did all of the letterings. And then there's usually a final person called a flatter, which will flatten all of those layers to get them ready to send out. So these will all be panels. And so there's a lot to this, where
all of the boxes, right?
All of the little boxes. And so sometimes they're much larger, sometimes they are smaller.
Right.
Sometimes, and it's all kind of depends a lot on what knowing that your eye is going to look at everything first and then start reading through. And then knowing that like each of these times when you get to the bottom here, you want these little mini little mini cliffhangers that push you over into the next page.
Okay.
So the same is true for another BookEnds book. This one written by Jeremy Whitley and Jamie Noguchi. And so again, it still is, this is a YA. The other one was a adult graphic novel. So the YAs tend to be a little bit breathable and a little bit more. Jeremy is
I see what you're saying. So there's less panels and less words on a page, which means it breathes more.
Correct. And usually also what's different is the trim size. So the trim size would be the size of the book. They tend to be quite different.
Interesting.
So yeah, there's a lot of differences that go into of knowing, how many panels should be on a page to make sure that you can still see what's going on art-wise, but
Right.
still get all of your dialogue in. And it's a really big balancing. So here's one, because there's more dialogue, less panels.
Right.
So if an author wants to write graphic novels, how do they submit to you, or how does that work? And then how does, I guess it would be similar to, in your end, to publishers?
So there's a couple of different ways of going about doing this. The easiest is if you're an author illustrator yourself, you're doing all of the above. That's the easiest. If you're a new person, I'd like to see a lot more completed, to see that can you actually get from point A to point B and get all the way through. So for somebody who is new in a debut, I really would want to see something a lot more completed, which I know is a ton of work, but I want to make sure that you have the wherewithal to get from the beginning through all 240 or 180 or whatever you decide to do. For somebody who is in the comics industry or has a lot behind them, it's a lot less, because I know you can do the work. I know you have a track record, so it's kind of similar on the pro side of proposal versus full manuscript. When it's a little bit harder if you are an illustrator or a author only.
Right.
So in the comics industry, it is much more, and this is also a difference between comics industry versus New York publishing. New York publishing tends to be much happier to work like picture books, where they will, an author comes in, here's the script, we totally see where you're going, and then they will go out and find an illustrator for it.
And I noticed too that the difference between Matt and Jeremy's books, and not to exclude the other creators, is that there was only one artist for Jeremy for School for Extraterrestrial Girls.
Yes, so Jamie did all of this. I don't know if they had someone, I can check the front. Yeah, they did have somebody doing lettering who isn't on the front cover, because usually that's it's usually paid as a page rate. So you get X number, it might be only like $10 or $15 per page for doing lettering. So it's not as front and center as, but yeah, for this one, Jamie did all of the art and all of the colors. And it kind of depends. There are Matt is one who by his own admission goes, I don't like coloring. So he tends to likes to find a colorist to do that work. And it's very individual to the artist. He can color, he does great colors. There's some of the covers that he did colors for, but there's a lot of times where he's like, someone else can go color.
That's really cool.
So in terms of like submissions and what you look for, if you are, here's the difference then. In the comics industry, they tend to expect that you have an entire team in place. So they want to know, letters is another one of those that usually they can provide a letterist, because it is such an individual skill set. To know like how to place the word bubbles and everything else, so that it is a very unique skill set. But they tend to want you to have colors, inks, and script all in like one group.
Gotcha.
So their art styles are very different going from comics to what the New York houses are looking for. So sometimes it is, if you're an author, don't feel bad if you don't have an artist lined up, or you can't find someone. That sometimes, honestly, it is easier to send in a full script, and I know how to evaluate scripts. You know, there's some great, the hard thing with scripts is nothing is uniform across this industry whatsoever. There's the Marvel way, where you basically just kind of write paragraphs and the artist figures out what the heck to do, and then you go back in later and write the script. If it seems very backwards, you're correct. It is. But like, and there's other places where you say like panel 1, exterior this, and it kind of looks a little bit more like a film script. I hate using film script as a comparison for it, but it kind of winds up looking a little bit more like that. Of panel 1, this is what's happening, panel 2. But one thing to remember, that why it isn't a film script, is you can't say like in the middle of a panel the camera shifts from one person to the next. It's art animated.
Right,
Like,
right.
so there is a lot to knowing when you're setting up script that kind of even goes back to the theater. How does the blocking work? Where are people standing? You know, what kind of a shot is it? But you also want to leave it open enough for your artist to have some creative liberties too, that you're not being so strict with, okay, now it's a panel on this person, now it's on this, now it's, and then it where it's just so
Right.
strict. Sometimes artists will just kind of ignore some of those if they know something won't work, and will just kind of do their own thing. But you know, it's kind of a fine line. There's a lot of script books out there that you can take a look at and read through. There's a lot of on the comic side, you know, some of like the Marvel and the DC books, when they put those omnibuses out, that they'll do special things in the back where sometimes they'll do sample scripts. So the more you can read some of those and see what other people are doing and apply it to your own work as you're coming up with how you want to script, that's great. So yes, as an author who does not have any connections whatsoever, it's not like you are totally out of luck. You can still write up scripts, you can still submit those, and the art will come. Same thing on the other end, for artists who don't have somebody to work with. The more you can show off, even if you can't write a whole thing, if you can write a few pages of script yourself to show off what your sequentials look like, that's what these are all called. Like, this is all sequential art.
Okay.
So because it goes from point to point to point to
Mhm.
point. So I want to see like how your sequentials look and how you're able to go through part of a story. So if you can do a few pages of just like a little short, so I can see like what your art looks like, how you do sequentials, how you space out your panels, then it's usually enough for me to have enough to go on to see, you know, and obviously have other pieces of spot art and all of that, so you can see, you know, what do your characters look like? What are your character designs? How do hands look? You know, all of that stuff we all look for in our illustrators.
So on graphic novels are becoming huge right now, right? They're having a moment, you might say. So on the traditional side of things, would you say it's pretty similar to picture books then, in that you can be an author illo, you can be an author, you can be an illo, and then you can submit whatever you sort of create individually?
Yes, I would say so. It still is very similar. I mean, it is still possible to, on the traditional side, to take out a team. I've done it before. I've had success on that end, and I've not had success. It's kind of similar across the board for us of taking any project out. Some will work and some won't.
So you would want to see, and say it's just an author then, you would want to see a synopsis and a full script.
If it's somebody who is a complete debut and a complete unknown, I'd want to see that. If it's somebody who has a track record, a really like still an in-depth synopsis. Comics tend to have a little bit more of a pitch packet as opposed to like what we would do for a prose proposal of just like here's your 50 pages plus a synopsis, boom, you're done. These tend to have a little bit more of, if it's intended as a series, like a little paragraph about which each of the next series are, character outlines. So like if you have 4 or 5 main characters, there's usually a little paragraph about who they are as a person, what their goals are, personality,
Right.
etc. So if you're an author illustrator, tends to be,
The
here's
sketch,
your
right?
little paragraph plus a little sketch of the
Right.
person, so you can see more about who they are. Sometimes they'll have like a little elevator pitch, like a proposal pitch, synopsis, characters, and then maybe like, and it kind of depends after that for script pages. I like anywhere between 10 to 30. Kind of depends on the
Okay.
person and, you know, how well known they are in the industry. Because there are some I can say, I work with so and so. It's like, oh, that's awesome. I love this and this and this book about them. So it's like they don't need to have as much because they're a fairly well-known quantity, or there's the person who has had a few books out. We know they can do the work, but they might not be as well known. Then it's like, okay, let's do like 20 to 30 pages. And then that way there's a really good sense of who your characters are, how you write your script, that they can get a sense of you as a writer.
So is it like picture books then, and that you should have more than one to submit, or can you submit one complete package and
You
be
can
okay?
submit one complete package. I expect that most people have multiple projects at once, because that's kind of the way a lot of times comics works is you're submitting these books to this person, these books over here, and just trying to see where you can, because so much of it is freelance for lower page rates, so it's not quite as much as what like a New York house advance would be. So you kind of wind up spreading yourself much thinner. So I kind of expect that people will wind up having multiple projects as well. But I like to see, you know, one at a time. If it's something that I'm super interested in, I might say, hey, are you working on anything else, to have a sense. So it's, but for me, it's not a requirement. Others, people might feel differently, but for me, I kind of look at them individual as like not needing to have, okay, here are my 12 things that I'm ready and raring to go out with.
Well, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and keep an eye peeled for our conversations with other BookEnds agents. And we hope you enjoyed Mo's video. If you have any questions for her, especially about graphic novels, don't hesitate to put them in the comments and we'll get you an answer.
Bye.
Bye.